amazing things. So can you give us an overview of things you're doing these days?
I recently worked for the Center of Asian American Media as part of CanFest, which is an Asian American film festival. I mainly work in film and writing. I'm working on some personal writing projects right now that hopefully have, potential in the future, as well as potentially working with some filmmakers here in the Bay Area. Yeah.
Can you tell me about Baycat and that mission?
Yeah, Baycat is primarily focused on Babies Hunters Point, mostly serving people of color. Well, we're all kids, so children, kids of color, giving us free classes in basic media skills, Photoshop, Adobe Premiere, which is for editing, how to do video production,
Can you tell us about
graphic design,
eavesdropping?
Yes, it's a project called Eavesdropping Films. So in January, I gathered a group of writers together to write stories that we can film remotely and on cell phones. So
what do you feel like you owe your creativity and your curiosity to? Is it just nature, nurture?
I wanted to be a novelist. When I was in elementary school, I wanted to.
Website. It starts with a dialogue between. Can you tell me about? A little about the dialogue between what Deep Blue and Gary Kasparov?
We have a copy of Gary Kasparov's mind talking to a revived and now sentient and much more complex Deep Blue, and how they talk about it's like now you're a machine and I'm a machine.
Where do you think the future of the creativity of the human mind and automation or machine learning, artificial intelligence, like how do they merge together in a way that doesn't scare you?
No, all the paths I see are not super great.
Robot rights. I suppose what's the idea of robot rights?
How do we, think about it as an extension of animal rights, right? How do we treat these, I'm gonna guess like maybe by the time that I'm really old, like semi-intelligent beings.
Okay, we're recording. Thanks for doing this, Ginger. Welcome to whatever this is. I've been interviewing a lot of former colleagues, former students. I started a podcast. It's called Cathead Conversations. You can see these other ones, but I want to give you a chance to talk about what you're doing now and reflect on Cat a little bit. I'll say you were my student for 2 years, I believe, pre-calculus, calculus. You graduated in 2015, is that right?
16.
16?
Yes. Okay,
I had that wrong. What I remember is that you were like the wittiest student I ever had. You had a way of saying things very quickly that cut to the essence of something we were feeling, made us laugh. I felt a little bit intimidated because I usually like to be the witty one, and you kind of like pulled that rug from out under my feet. But I could see from your LinkedIn page that you're up to some amazing things. So can you give us an overview of the things you're doing these days?
Well, about the witty part, thank you. I'm a writer now, so that's really helpful to know that there was some talent at work back then. I'm a year out from graduating from Chapman University, where I have a screenwriting major, English minor. I recently worked for the Center of Asian American Media as part of CanFest, which is an Asian American film festival. I mainly work in film and writing. I'm working on some personal writing projects right now that hopefully have, potential in the future, as well as potentially working with some filmmakers here in the Bay Area.
Let me get this out of the way. When you blow up and become famous, like, are you somebody I can come to get tickets to like fancy events and things?
Maybe.
Okay.
Depends on how busy I am.
Okay.
I will consider it now that you've asked directly. Yes, I shall. I will not give you money if I feel like if anyone comes out of the woodwork asking for that, that's a pretty solid no.
I just want to be good at the events where
tickets, sure.
famous people are at. Yeah.
I'll do a community screening of whatever happens in San Francisco. You're invited. Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you. That's great. That's the hookup. So I don't know much about filmmaking. Can you tell me what goes into being a filmmaker?
Oh, that is a very general question. Right now I'm primarily working in screenwriting and directing. I actually just started producing, which is a lot more technical and administrative. It's a pretty big, wide range. I'm just gonna quickly tell you what I've worked in, and you can ask me some more general questions. I've worked on set, mostly as a second camera assistant, sometimes PA, like production assistant. I have a screenwriting degree. I have been directing at Baycat after school. So during CAT, after I go to school at CAT, I take the bus, go to an after school program called Baycat, where I learned just like a really wide range of basic video production, editing. I freelance a little bit as a video editor. I'm trying to get out of that right now because it's not the career I want. But I would not mind working on set more because it's a great way to meet people. Yeah, and I work in film festivals. So there's a whole, like, film has such a huge range of positions and jobs. I've tried out a lot. You can ask me something more specific with this. Yeah.
Who are your influences?
Directorially, I really, man, that's a pretty wide range too. Currently, I'm trying to get into more Yasujiro Ozu. I need to watch more of that. Influences. Barry Jenkins is like a current inspiration. Barry Jenkins and Bong Joon-ho. They have Barry's a little like he's a little more upcoming. Like he's worked for a long time, but he's certainly gotten a lot more attention nowadays. And I really love what he makes films about. His partner Lulu Wang, also really great. Chloe Zhao, I need to catch up with Chloe Zhao, everything that happened with her. And but I'm also, trying to like go back into the older filmmakers, looking at the styles from that sort of formed the foundation for what we're watching right now. So it's pretty, like, I'm trying to go about a pretty wide range. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. I'd ask you more specific questions, but it's not I don't have much expertise in this subject, but I'm interested to go look up some of these things kind of after we finish the interview. How about Baycat? Tell me, I looked on their website. I thought it was interesting. It says we exist to end racism and sexism through storytelling.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about Baycat and that mission?
Yeah, Baycat is primarily focused on Bayview Hunters Point. We are located in the dog patch, but that's right next to Bayview, and mostly serving people of color. Well, we're all kids, so children, kids of color, giving us free classes in basic media skills, Photoshop, Adobe Premiere, which is for editing, how to do video production, how to do graphic design, how to do motion effect, like motion graphics, visual effects, everything for free. We have mentors, teachers. They also run a studio that also helps provide some of the funding for the students. So it's a nonprofit program that survives on like donations and whatever the studio makes work on. So I've worked for the studio side a little bit. I've interned a little bit, as a teacher's assistant. Overall, like, this is what set the foundation for me being able to go to film school and be in film. It certainly, at the very least, like, gave me a lot of confidence when I came into film school. I was really prepared to go in and work with everyone, and I knew the basic skills. I was actually able to work on some TV pilots like in my first year, which is kind of uncommon for me to have a position as a second camera assistant sort of at that stage. Usually people were just production assistants running around getting coffees, lifting some equipment. I was working more closely with the camera team. So that was really great for me, just preparing me. I think a lot of people after, in hindsight, when I talked to them, they were like, I was really intimidated in film school. I came in, didn't know anything about film. Something like, I don't know how I got in, but once I was in, I was just really scared, and I didn't have that attitude coming in. I was prepared to learn more. So that's what Baycat gave me, as well as a foundation here in the Bay Area. A lot of my cohorts went to Los Angeles. I chose to come back here because Baycat's got my back, and that community connection actually definitely, I think, helped me work with Cam. I mean, just because the entire community knows each other, there's a bit more of trust going on. I've been working in nonprofit for a while, so that's set a pretty solid foundation for how I will continue forward in the Bay Area. Yeah.
And I don't know if this is much of a question or if you can speak to this, but I feel like the mission of fighting racism and sexism through storytelling, like there's one part of exposing things that we've swept under the rug, like I guess kind of white supremacy type topics. And then there's probably another part of promoting people whose identities has been excluded from film traditionally, and telling proud and empowering stories of them. Is the work both of those, or is it more geared towards one or the other?
I'd say in the same vein of my previous statements, like Baycat has definitely prepared me a lot. A lot of our alumni would go on to work in video production, etc. in the Bay Area. I sort of took a detour with film school, and I'm gonna see what happens next. But yeah, that's a big part. It's giving people of color those skills to get them staffed somewhere, and eventually we're gonna work our way up. It's more of a first step than it is like the team will support us and help us, and whatever connections they make through Baycat, they will help us. But when it comes to like how does Baycat directly do it, that's a little harder to answer because it's such a complex system that we're in. But for me, it's like, yes, Baycat gave me the tools to start. Baycat gave me the confidence to say, yes, I'm a filmmaker. Yes, I know these skills. I have these skills. I've been working on them for 8 years. And I've made the mistakes I needed to make in film at Baycat. My earlier stuff, no one likes their earlier stuff. I definitely cycled through a lot of material. So that's sort of the main thing that happens. And eventually, right, the hope is that there's more representation in film, which leads to more people understanding each other, understanding each other's cultures. And like if you think about it, it's like if there was a prominent Asian American presence in media, it's like, would that have alleviated some of the hate crimes and the racism if people actually understood the culture, and or at the very least had some basic knowledge of how these things operate and came to be. Hypothetically, would that help? We don't know right now, but hopefully that's a reality that can happen.
All right, thanks for that. That's very interesting and important things you're drawing attention to, I think. As far as your personal project goes, you have several of them. You talked about eavesdropping being the one that you want to talk about. So can you tell us about eavesdropping?
Yes, it's a project called Eavesdropping Films. So in January, I gathered a group of writers together to write stories that we can film remotely and on cell phones. So in the end, it sort of evolves into something that is more about how do we make filmmaking accessible and diverse. And part of that is sort of like cutting the bottom lines, like, oh, we need this really fancy camera. Oh, we need this crew. It's like, no, you don't need that. You can just write something that can fit the format of being being filmed by a cell phone. So I'm hoping that this would eventually culminate in, nonprofit, or at the very least, some funding or opportunities for me and my team to either continue experimenting with this method or to, you know, expand upon it, or just overall to get paid for our creative work. And see, it's like, okay, if we can, you know, make creative work using what's in our pockets, and if we can get, you know, find other people who are willing to do that, it's like, how is that going to elevate us as storytellers who don't have any money? If you if you don't know, the entire industry system is built upon connections, and a lot of it is, you know, oh, you know, the family members of directors who get the position, you know, a lot of nepotism. A lot of, it's really hard to break into film because it takes so much money to make films. It's a really complex project that's a huge team effort. But if we can sort of, by designing a method that makes it much more affordable to make film, not content, not, you know, vlogs, not casual things, but I'm talking about like serious cinema with thought and purpose behind it. But you're behind you're behind a cell phone instead of a 30-pound camera, which I I have handled on set, and that was an ordeal for sure. So that's what I'm working towards. We're online at Eavesdropping Films as a sort of username. So that's where we're going to be. We're posting things right now. We're in post-production right now, finishing up on editing a lot of things. Almost done, almost there. Just have to push the team through that last struggle. It's getting a little tough right now because we've been working for so long, and when the end is near, it's sometimes it's a little hard to put those final hours in. Yeah.
It feels like it gets, a lot of projects, the closer you get to the end, the more intense they get.
Yeah.
So that's cool. And I'm excited to check eavesdroppingfilms.com, you said? Okay.
Just at Eavesdropping Films we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook. We're just focusing on that for now, and then we'll see what happens next.
Okay, I'll check it out. Can you talk about Cat, like reflect on your high school experience a little bit?
What specifically?
Well, Cat is City Arts and Tech, right? Do you feel like part of your interest in arts was inspired by classes at Cat?
I will be perfectly honest. I had been interested in art and writing and film long before Cat, and I was certainly grateful for Cat for. I almost I considered going to Lowell, which is, as you know, an intense school. And I should have applied to SOTA, School of the Arts. Cat, I think, was interesting. I definitely learned some useful skills at Cat, like Photoshop and some editing skills, painting. That was really great. Overall, not, to be honest, like not as huge as an impression as Baycat. So you're gonna have to ask some really specific questions about what I think about everything.
Okay. It wasn't I wasn't trying to force a positive reflection or anything. Just you know, a lot of students have said that the transition from the rigor at Cat to college level rigor was difficult, because and I think we knew this at the time, but because we had a 4-point grading scale at Cat, and just we were teaching a population that it was not all going to 4-year colleges. Did you experience some of that?
Certainly in freshman year of college, it got a little intense where I took on a full-time workload immediately, and that was quite a transition. I specifically remember just being in the library and typing up the last of my essay an hour before class, and just really procrastinating on that. Overall, to be honest, it wasn't a huge shift. I kind of was expecting it. I worked hard at Cat, and I had pretty good grades, and I studied for my tests, and I was always ready to learn more. So it was not really a workload issue. It was more of a just like a overall getting used to college. Sort of that transition was, in hindsight, kind of okay, but it certainly wasn't it wasn't smooth as like any transition is. It wasn't perfect and smooth.
Yeah, right, for sure. I was curious because you said you were thinking of going to Lowell. That I was sort of thinking of Cat and Lowell as two very opposite ends of the spectrum with a lot of things in between. But as a Asian American or Chinese American student who went to a predominantly Black and Latino school, how was your experience different than you think the typical kid that went to Lowell would have had?
That has been my experience throughout going to school in San Francisco, to be honest. So when I went to middle school in the Bayview, so Kit Bayview, that was predominantly Black, and some Latino, some there are a good number of Asian Pacific Americans, but both schools had like 3 Chinese kids. That was it. I didn't mind it that much. I suppose it was not something that I thought about a lot because my family and I do not engage with our culture very intensely. They didn't, send me to Chinese school when we immigrated here. They just sort of let me do whatever I wanted. I was certainly, no, I think I'm quite glad to be in such a diverse school, to have all these perspectives around me. I think when it comes to the Asian American perspective, I don't think it would have, it's not like we are automatically going to be comforted by having people like us around. I certainly, was sort of on the fringes of the Asian American clubs in Chapman, but I was not, intimate friends with any of them. I just, sometimes we shared our culture with each other, and that was lovely. But I don't remember any specific, there were no racial incidents when I was at Cat. I actually felt like the crowd there was quite nice. I mean, it was very much not the stereotypical movie high school. There were no like huge cliques. I wasn't bullied. I wasn't, and I wasn't, there were no like, okay, I suppose there were a couple of popular kids, but it wasn't like what the movies are like. It was everyone, there was a community there that was pleasant.
Yeah, I remember it that way too. And I teach at a large high school now where it's nothing's your stereotypical movie type situation, but there are band kids and there are athletes, and there's
we didn't have enough
different
money for band.
Right.
Cat didn't have the resources to form cliques like that. We didn't have plays. We didn't have bands. That was not a thing. Yeah.
But I asked you because I think I talk with my kids now. I think Asian American is a huge category sometimes that we forget how many different pieces there are in that header. But
it's a political identity. It's not even a racial identity, because you have such a wide range. East Asian, South Asian, Pacific Islanders kind of get lumped into us, Asian Americans, but it's more of like the label of Asian Americans was a political identity that was constructed back when near the civil rights movement, when a lot of small populations needed to band together to improve their conditions in America. So it's a complex identity because I'm Chinese, but when it comes to a Japanese American or a Japanese person, there's different political things going on in there with our home countries that are really complex, and there's really interesting things going on with the Philippines, etc. So it's not homogenous by any means.
Yeah, and I just like to point that out because I think we do lump a ton of different cultures in that header sometimes.
Yeah.
And at my school, we have a lot of Chinese and Korean and Indian students.
Yeah.
We don't have many Vietnamese, which I think is a big community in the Bay Area. That's not that at our school we don't have a lot. But what I talk about is the term model minority with students a lot, and how that it's a loaded term and it has unfair implications for them. But you are, I would say, kind of like a defiance of the model minority, because you're a filmmaker, you're an artist, you're a genius and ambitious and all of these things, but you haven't, I don't know, like, and you spoke to this about your parents really not putting pressure on you, but I don't know, do you feel like that the expectations of Asian Americans to be a certain type of way ever put any pressure on you?
Only when it came to being racially profiled, and I never had any, like I said, my parents never pressured me to have good grades. That was all me. I'm the overachiever. I was never pressured into being that. I certainly gave up on math after high school. If you need to know that, I was like, nope, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I terrible at coding, terrible at anything, terrible at music theory, which is horribly mathematic. But I can't drive, but that's like more of a Bay Area thing than an Asian thing. But I get scared of people, pointing that out, that it's a stereotype, but it's more of like, I spent my life on buses than anything else, I think. When it comes to that, I don't know. I feel like being at CAT I didn't get influenced by that, that standpoint. I suppose, hypothetically, Lowell might have been like that. Yeah, I don't feel much pressure by it. That's kind of it. Yeah. I've always been interested in the arts, like, my whole life. So it has never occurred to me to, try to be anything else. And I suppose my parents did have early interest in me becoming an engineer, because that's, what they were doing back in China. But they quickly saw that I did not have the chops for it when it came to mathematical thinking. So that has been laid to the wayside, and they're supportive of my my art. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think you probably could have done a lot of different things. Like, I remember you as a good student in my math class. You probably were looking for more of an inspiring teacher or something. But I feel like
it was a fun class. Yeah.
But
I like puns.
Huh?
I genuinely enjoyed the pun worksheets. I thought they were
oh, that's taking me back.
Yeah. I would not say that they were good jokes, but they were they were enjoyable.
So, but I do talk a lot about how I think school does a lot of times, like, what we want to be teaching for the future is creativity, curiosity, like an intrinsic interest in learning, which you have. But I think sometimes school is so structured, it does the opposite to kids. And I think math could be structured in a way that inspires creativity and curiosity, but it's not really. It's mostly closed-ended. I guess, do you feel like, what do you feel like you owe your creativity and your curiosity to? Is it just nature, nurture? Is it something you haven't thought about very much?
Unfortunately, I would have to say just nature, because, like I said, that's my whole life. I've been obsessed with that. So even, I just remember in elementary school, even back in China, I would just read short stories instead of do homework. I wanted to be a novelist. When I was in elementary school, I wanted to I wanted to be a writer. I'm still a writer, but I'm a lot more now, which is really exciting. This has been I didn't go to CAT because it was called City Arts and Tech. I went to CAT because a lot of my friends at Kit Baby went to CAT, so that was and it was close by. So there's no like deeper meaning really to it, I feel, but I'm certainly grateful that it has helped me. It's like it's given me room for Baycat. It's given me, you know, some skills that are really useful. So I'm just I feel like I'm on a path that I have already determined for a while, and I'm really happy to be, you know, moving forward on it.
Okay, great. Um, the the piece that I read of yours was the AI, what was it called? AI inspired poetry.
Yeah, AI poetry. Yeah.
AI poetry. And I thought that was great. I assume people can still purchase it from
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
website. There, it starts with a dialogue between, can you tell me about
Yeah.
a little about the dialogue between what Deep Blue and Gary Kasparov?
Yeah. So Deep Blue was the chess computer that the first chess computer that beat a human. So that's Deep Blue. That's Gary Kasparov, who was at the time the world chess champion. And I went into what that conversation would be like in, I believe it was 2047, something like that, where now we have a copy, if you know about the theory of mind uploading, we have a copy of Gary Kasparov's mind talking to a revived and now sentient and much more complex Deep Blue. And how they talk about it's like now you're a machine and I'm a machine. How do you reflect on, you know, how AI and human relations were back then, how you are right now? It's a lot of theory. Just a little background on this project. It's overall it's called Letters from an AI Poet to Its Creator. And I just got I got a research grant from Chapman right before I graduated, and that's why I had time and energy to do it. I was very lucky to have received that grant. And it's about, you know, AI theory of far into the future. So we're not talking about AI right now, which is still pretty simple and basic and makes a lot of mistakes. But I'm thinking far into the future, it's like, okay, you know, think robot rights, which is really far ahead. But you know, AI ethics, AI aesthetics through computer poetry, and there are computer programs that produce poetry. It's a little rough, as you can see from the things I put in that book. But the Deep Blue and Kasparov conversation just sort of came out of me. I listened to a podcast interview he did about AI, and I thought, well, wouldn't it be great if he could, you know, talk to this machine in the future? And it was helpful that I was able to sort of glean a lot of his personal feelings and experiences when it came to that match from that research. So yeah, that's the project. It's on Twitter. I post poetry on Twitter. I sort of follow all the little Twitter bots that post poetry and random phrases. The project's been a little pushed back right now. I generated a lot of love poetry back in February, so I'm hoping to print a second book. The first book was my earlier work. The second book, some love poems, and then we'll see where that goes. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. I was super interested in this idea that the Deep Blue talks about earlier on, like the idea of making mistakes and learning from mistakes. Like, is that's kind of what AI is?
Yeah.
And so you said AI is making a lot of mistakes now, and I don't know that much about it, but is AI, are computers
it's
really
controversial and juicy.
It's a
great.
good topic.
Yeah, a lot of it's a lot of facial recognition software has a lot of facial recognition software right now is very racist because it's based on mainly white people. It's pretty much based on white people. So especially when it comes to, and for I suppose like fair-skinned people, I suppose, Asian Americans or at least East Asians might fare a little better in this circumstance, but say people with darker skin might be mislabeled. There's this really horrible incident where Black people were identified as a gorilla. So that was really, really bad, of course. And basically, machines need to be trained and need to consider biases when trained. This is also has impacted women where, if you train an AI software and you give them an image of two doctors, one is a male, one is a female, they might label it as nurse, or they might label it as like nice, smile, instead of professional, for the man, etc. So that has, we need a long way, we need to work on that before any AI structures become deeply ingrained in society and used for, say, security systems. And if that becomes concrete, then, well, guess who that fucks over,
Mm-hmm. I was thinking about something having to do with like people we learn a lot through our suffering and losing and trauma. And I think that's when we develop tools like empathy and emotional intelligence. So the idea of a sentient computer, is that something you think we'll get to at some point?
I'd say maybe at the end of my lifetime, maybe. It's not something that I feel like we should really aim towards, because if you think about the ethics of it, it's like, are you really going to create something when you don't know how to handle it? Or it's like, I refer to it as actually like parenthood. That's one of the main sort of points. If I were to expand the novel into a novel or narrative, which I have, like lying in the back, in the files of my computer, there is a novella that I haven't put out yet. But it does examine it as a parent-child relationship, AI and human, because you have full control, and it's even more intimate because you have full control over the details of how this thing is created. And once it's sentient, it's like, what are you gonna do with it? And whatever you do, it's permanent because it's a thinking, learning machine. Yeah. So I hope I don't see whatever happens with that, because I feel like we might fuck up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also think people learn through two different modes, like one through reading, or I guess what we call deductive learning, and then through our experiences. And I think we are already at a time where we're overvalued. Like you said, parenting, it makes me think of how people think they can read books and learn about parenting. Like we're living in a time when people read so many books before they parent, but I think they learn from parenting through the parenting itself. Where do you think the future of like the creativity of the human mind and automation or machine learning, artificial intelligence, like how do they merge together in a way that doesn't scare you?
No, all the paths I see are not super great. I suppose the utopia would be, machines will help us, and they will help us be more human. They can take away the monotonous tasks. Imagine you had a grading machine, just perfect, right? For your, even with the messy handwriting, even with everything, all the things that can go wrong with how a student turns in work. If you could take grading away and just focus on teaching, wouldn't that be better?
It would, although I have lots of thoughts on this. Like I'm not one who's very reverent of schools. I think we're still stuck teaching skills in schools that our computers are already doing. It's not like it's a matter of time before they're doing them. Like we're teaching a lot of times kids step-by-step processes or information retention. There was the Deep Blue thing made me think of, apparently some smart people programmed a computer to beat the guy that won Jeopardy. There was a guy that won Jeopardy like months straight. You heard about that? That was a long time ago. And the Jeopardy questions are worded in a very complicated way. So to program a computer to do that just showed that retaining information isn't really a job of the future. It's being creative and adapting to information, I think.
I would argue against that actually, because if you want to have mathematicians or coders who don't understand the basic steps of math and had to go through that in their childhood, how do you trust them to be really responsible with what they're working with? I feel like to be responsible, you need to know the basic building blocks of things. Maybe you don't need to take them through, all those worksheets and exercises all the time, but you have to start with 1 + 1. And you have to start with, where did this come from? Why do we have this theorem? They have to do it by hand before they rely on a machine, because once you rely on the machine and you don't know what the machine is doing, like that's how things spiral into maybe disaster. But you have to understand what the machine is doing, because otherwise you're in this, if you know about the term, the black box. It's like if you don't know what's going on in the black box in a machine, and sure, we don't know a lot of what's going on in our computer, but as we move forward, we still need to have basic understandings of the world before we can rely on things that do that for us.
Okay, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Like I see sometimes kids with once I give them a calculator, they start just adding 2 + 2 because that's, their brain shuts off.
Yeah. So you have to, like I said, you get someone to do 1 + 1 on paper before you hand them a calculator.
But I think it's a balance. There's no perfect solution for it, but the way math is taught, especially, but I think all subjects, for a lot of students, it does becomes something that's archaic or esoteric, something that they don't have any interest in, and then they not only lose in interest in learning, they, I think, dislike some of our institutions for forcing them to go through stuff that was so disconnected with the real world. But anyways, these are big problems. How robot rights? You said something about robot rights. What's the idea of robot rights?
How do we, think about it as an extension of animal rights, right? How do we treat these, I'm gonna guess like maybe by the time that I'm really old, like semi-intelligent beings. There has been a really interesting point about how monitoring robots can actually, like robot abuse, can actually lead to people finding out about, the same perpetrators of robot abuse would enact that on either their animals or their family. So that was a really interesting point that came up, where it's like, okay, it's not just about, it's like, oh, this is a cold hard piece of machinery that we made in a factory, no problem, you can kick it whenever you see it. Then it's like, okay, but where's that instinct coming from? How does that impact other people in the lives of the perpetrator? And it's really robot rights is a huge complex thing, but hopefully in the future we'll have it more figured out before things really get into motion. But really what's interesting is like people are really attached to their, what are they called, the little sweeping machines, the Roombas. Like people get attached to them. They prefer to get them repaired than get a replacement. They're starting to become pets. And it's like, that's like the relationship that we're looking at. It's like, it's just like, animal rights, like the animal abuse. But who knows, as these machines become more complex and sentient, then it's like, whoa, that's really troubling. That's a lot to deal with later on.
Well, yeah, especially if they can gain rights and then also learn how to be their own lawyers in courts. Oh
yeah, they'd be very good lawyers.
Yeah. Well, and they have. Automation has replaced a lot of lawyers' positions already, I think.
Yeah.
Just had a little brain freeze. I feel like those are very interesting topics to me, and for the future, who knows how it's going to evolve. But do you think, well, all right, here's one other question. Do you think like, will robots ever write scripts, or like, will we get to that
They
point?
already are. They're terrible. They're horrible. But what I fear is one person who is both a coder and a writer just taking charge of that and just churning out scripts and over flooding the market. That's my big fear. I think I know one asshole who might do it. I'm just not gonna. Yeah.
Which means there will be so many scripts out there that the process of finding the good ones that were actually written by people is going to be harder and
executives
harder.
are already using AI to try to figure out what's the next big hit. They're already trying to do that. So my fear is that the art industry might get taken over by AI when it comes to people who have the money and the means, and they're trying to figure out how to invest it. Because in the end, all the big executive producers are just people with pockets deep full of money trying to figure out what they're going to make a profit off of next. So that's the most yeah, we'll see how that goes.
Okay. Well, are there other, you're pretty knowledgeable about all this stuff. Are there any other kind of like bigger picture issues or futures that you foresee that common people like me should be more aware of?
I'd say AI is the big one. The sort of Bitcoin NFT machine is really going. There's pros and cons to it. I'm not an expert, so I don't have any insight about that. It's bad for the environment, but it's I don't know. It's a whole thing.
It's bad for the environment because it uses so much computer power to write whatever the things,
the processing
the blockchain.
Power. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think when it came, I think Bitcoin mining is about the production, like the consumption of a medium-sized country. Like the power consumption is pretty huge. Yeah.
And are they working on some kind of cryptocurrencies that solves that problem, I've heard.
I feel like that's not gonna, I feel like if you fight it's like, let's put out this fire with another fire that's meant to like, I'm not super trustworthy of that. I don't know, it's like Elon Musk is like a big person like in this limelight, and he's doing his thing, and I don't know what he's doing.
Trying to go to Mars or something.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I know he has recently come out. I think he said maybe Tesla won't accept Bitcoin because of the environmental threat it proposes. Yeah, I don't trust him.
He's gonna say whatever he needs to say. That's it.
Yeah. He's powerful enough to manipulate the market in such a huge way that I think I just assume he's doing it for some kind of self-serving interest. But yeah, I've been trying to follow the cryptocurrency. It's very complicated because I think there's like a technical end of just like what is blockchain and how does it work, and then there's the whole U.S. monetary system, which is more complex than even our accounting system.
Yeah.
All right. So, what does NFT stand for? Can you tell me that?
Non-fungible token.
And what is that?
For art. It's for NFTs are for art. So it's saying it's digital reproducible. Sorry. So before, digital art you can't really sell digital art because it's just a file. But now there's a big old machine saying, here's a non-fungible token. Here's a unique token that proves that you own this piece of digital art that exists as a file, can't be replicated, can't be duplicated. But here's a proof on this registry that you own this. So it is it's like hyper-capitalism. It's like the value of something that is not even, it is just a file that can sell for a lot of money just for proof to own. It's yeah, it's
Yeah, okay, that's interesting.
yeah, read more on it. It's really yeah.
I'll definitely have to look into it more. The acronym reminded me of ETFs, which is a totally different thing in finance. But I am out of questions about your personal or professional life. Do you have any final pearls of wisdom or nuggets of knowledge or internal reflections or anything you want to talk about or share with any audience that listens to this?
My goodness. No, I'm not a source of wisdom. I'm I'm barely getting it together. I'd say, I mean, if I wanted to promo anything, it'd be, you know, I'm working on eavesdropping right now. Eavesdropping films on Instagram, on Facebook. I have the book that you bought. I know the link. It's gum.co/AIP VOL1. So that's AI Poet Volume 1 on Gumroad. So who knows? Maybe that will get some more people to read the book. But also I'm on Twitter at the AI Poet for the AI Poetry project. So those are the main sort of big things I'm working on a little more publicly. I'm working on more things in the background. Oh, I work at Adobe Books. I don't work at Adobe Books. I volunteer at Adobe Books, which is a secondhand bookshop on 24th Street in the Mission. I work there on Sundays. I open on Sundays. If anyone wants to pop in and say hi, I will be there. Otherwise, I will still be staying home and staying safe for the most of the time. I've been working remotely. Yeah. Other than that, I'm just continuing with making creative work, as well as, you know, having a job in actually really specifically like Asian American media nonprofit. I think that has been a niche that I've apparently fallen into, which is great, and I love it. So yeah, that's how my life has been so far. Thanks for wanting to talk to me.
Yeah, you're a very interesting person. I think you're both a thinker and a doer, and you don't give yourself enough credit. But I'm pretty inspired by all the things that you're taking on, and excited to see wherever it leads to.
I am too. I have no idea where it's going.
That's the fun part.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Ginger.
Thank you. All right.